Hello, ladies and gentlemen. My name is The Advocate, and today I'm an advocate for my top 10 books of 2025. Because yes, that's right, comrades. I did, in fact, manage to read 10 books this year. Woo! Best booktuber ever. Yeah, all these people that are able to read 5,000 books within like a second, I have no idea how they're able to do that. We do things a little bit differently here on the Booktube Advocate channel. So I wanted to go ahead and take the chance to record a video essentially letting you guys know what were the 10 best books I read this year. Now, these aren't recent book releases. These are just books that I happen to have read in the calendar year of 2025. But okay, with all that out of the way, I think now's as good a time as any to delve into this top 10 list. Like, comment, and subscribe if you enjoy. Click that join button if you care to become a channel member. Now, before we get started on the list proper, there is actually one book I wanted to kind of give a quick shout out to, and that is I'm Glad My Mom Died by Jennette McCurdy. I know this book was released a few years ago, so I'm a little bit late to the party, but I happen to have read this book in 2025, and I thought it was a very, very, very fantastic book written by former iCarly star Jennette McCurdy, who no longer wishes to be known as that iCarly star. It is a wonderful, well, I don't know if wonderful is the correct term here. It is a very interesting, immersive, haunting, and very powerful read, and I fully recommend anyone who hasn't read that book to definitely check it out. It is nonfiction. It is based on essentially Jennette McCurdy blogging about her life and how she transpired to become a Nickelodeon star and all the horrors that went into it, you know, toxic family dynamics, toxic Nickelodeon dynamics, just all these different toxic dynamics that she experienced throughout her childhood and early young adulthood that has led her to this point of growth. I thought it was a very, very great read, and the only reason I'm not ranking that book on this list is because I didn't feel right ranking someone novelizing their experiences with eating disorders and with very toxic dynamics that they went through, and then saying like, okay, well, you know, how interested was I in these toxic dynamics when compared to some of these other reads on this list? So it is only for that reason that this book is not ranked. But if you guys haven't checked out I'm Glad My Mom Died by Jennette McCurdy, I think it's well worth it. Absolutely amazing book. And Jennette McCurdy, she definitely has a future in writing. She's an excellent writer, so all top marks here. Number 10. My number 10 book on this list is Murder by Memory by Olivia Waite. Murder by Memory was actually released this year in 2025, so it's one of the few books on this list that was actually released within this calendar year. And it is a very kind of cozy murder mystery with a little bit of science fiction elements to it. And I thought it was an okay read. It's only 100 pages long, so it's mercifully short. I know I say mercifully as if this book was a pain to read through. It wasn't a pain to read through, but it definitely was my least favorite book that I read this year. There's nothing really that interesting going about with this book. It's got very cozy vibes for sure, but there's nothing really deep to it. Essentially, it's a murder mystery, but I say murder mystery in quotation marks because it's not really a mystery. It's more of just someone kind of stumbling through quote unquote mystery and just kind of figuring things out as they go along. And it's okay. I mean, the characters are pretty weak. The world building is pretty weak as well. This book takes place on the spaceship called the Fairweather. I would have liked to spend more time on the Fairweather with Olivia Waite maybe describing more of the elements of the Fairweather, kind of delving us more into the prose of the atmosphere of the situation. But she is relatively one note with her prose. I'm not really immersed in the story. The mystery is kind of non-existent. The characters are pretty flat, so it's nothing that I would go out of my way to read. The only thing that I would say that was kind of interesting about this book was as people are living on these spaceships because life on Earth has expired, a la the movie WALL-E, people are drinking these cocktails with these different sights, smells, and sounds that remind them of what life was like back on Earth before life on Earth essentially expired. And so being able to drink, like a hot summer day. And so they drink these cocktails that remind them of a hot summer day. It's like, oh, that's pretty cool. It's pretty interesting. You know, it reminds them of past times and is able to immerse their senses into what life was prior to these spaceships. So these cocktails, you know, the drinks that they drink, I thought that was a pretty interesting twist. I haven't personally read something like that before, but that aside, And, the fact that this is a short read, I don't really think you really have to go out of your way to read Murder by Memory. I'm sorry to say, especially because Olivia Waite is a small-time independent author, and this is an independently published book, so I don't want to dog on an independent author because I know they put their heart, soul, and tears into writing a book. But the weak characters, weak mystery, and weak world building is why, unfortunately, I have this book as number 10 on this top 10 list. Number 9. Iron John, A Book About Men by Robert Bly. This is I don't know if I would call it nonfiction. It's more of a dissertation, a breakdown of the 1812 parable by the Grimm brothers called Iron John, as Robert Bly essentially breaks down that parable and uses it as a metaphor for the coming of age for young adults, for teenagers, as they leave home, cut ties with their parents, and kind of become their own person. And the concepts within this book are relatively interesting. I think it has some things going on for it. I think the way in which Robert Bly breaks down the book and adds his own personal interpretation as to what he thinks the Grimm brothers were trying to say with the metaphors of the Iron John fairy tale, I think are relatively interesting. The only thing I have a problem with is I thought, and maybe that's maybe more of my own expectations, I was under the impression that this was going to be more of a unbiased kind of breakdown of that Grimm's fairy tale book, with looking at statistics and research of what the Grimm brothers were trying to do with that original fairy tale and actually applying it to modern day audiences, as opposed to this just being Robert Bly's own personal bias take on I think this is what this book is about, and I'm not going to explain why. I just think that's what it is about, and this is why you should do the things that I say you should do, which is fine, but it's someone's own opinion as opposed to it being perhaps more research, more informed take on that 1812 fairy tale. But as is, it's an interesting book. I think I'm probably more interested in the fairy tale it references itself as opposed to this book that's referencing that fairy tale. The fairy tale is actually in the back of this book. It's the story of Iron John, and it is here in the last 10 pages of this book, which I thought was pretty interesting. It's a pretty interesting fairy tale from the Grimm brothers. However, the book itself, again, just not too big of a fan of. So if you get it from the library or if you get it gifted as a gift, it might be worth checking out. But as is, it's my number 9 book for this year. Number 8. The Archivist by T. McKell. This is the last book that was released in 2025 that will be on this list. And all in all, I thought The Archivist is an example of great potential, but sadly very poor execution, or I guess I should say non-execution. So the story is essentially about 22-year-old Cora Moreau as she's in this research lab in Spain, and it promises all these time-traveling shenanigans using blood and these scientific concepts, which the little nuggets we get here and there throughout the book are relatively interesting, and I was keen to see T perhaps expanding on those scientific concepts more throughout this story. Instead, what I got was a romance novel that happened to have a few of those scientific elements. Now, there's nothing wrong with wanting to write a romance. There's nothing wrong with romance novels in general. However, when the romance is done poorly, then it does tend to detract my personal reading experience. And unfortunately, that is the case here with The Archivist. The romance feels very middle school-ish, if I should say, very shallow, very one note, a lot of flat characters kind of kissing about, romancing about, spicing about. There is a couple of spice scenes in here, which are fine. I mean, they're actually, the spice scenes are probably the best written thing when it comes to the romance itself. Well, quote unquote romance. But that aside, it just feels very childish, and I don't know, it's not what I wanted. I know what T. McKell was trying to do. She was trying to balance out the science fiction elements with the romance. However, she more heavily leaned towards the romance while completely ignoring the science fiction elements. And the science fiction elements are, by and large, the best part about this book. Unfortunately, it's only about 5 to 10% of the book. So for being an independently published author, it's a spirited first attempt by T. McKell. But I do wish that in the follow-up novels, which I think I will check out a second novel from her just to see if she's improved as a writer, I would be keen to see if she expands more on the scientific elements, and also if she tones down on the telling not showing, because good gosh, T. McKell tells instead of shows, and it's really, really obnoxious. But again, it's on this list, number 8, but it doesn't go any higher on this list. Number 7. Fire and Blood by George R. R. Martin. So I'm technically cheating a little bit here. I have previously read Fire and Blood quite a couple of times. I'm currently actually on my third read through, or just finishing up my third read through of this Fire and Blood book by George R. R. Martin. So this is technically a reread. Don't worry, this is the only reread on this top 10 list. However, because I was rereading through it and taking some time from this 2025 calendar year to read this book, I thought I needed to put it on this list. And Fire and Blood, I already have a full review on this book on my channel, as I have a review of pretty much all these books on this list, with exception of Iron John, a book about men, on my channel. So if you want to see more in-depth reviews of each of the books that I've put on this list, definitely check out my YouTube channel and check out all those book review videos. But Fire and Blood, it's a historical fiction following the Targaryen dynasty during the first 137 years, plus the 2 years prior to Aegon's conquest of the Targaryen history. And it's a very, very, very good read. I actually prefer this sort of Targaryen history to a real life history, if that makes me sound as a horrible person. But I mean, it's the truth. I think it's a very interesting history. The only thing I think I will say that detracts my read through of Fire and Blood when compared to obviously compared to the other main Song of Ice and Fire series, is the fact that this book is essentially just a summarizing kind of historical text retelling of events that happen, as opposed to being a kind of more character-centered focused story, similar to the main Song of Ice and Fire series and similar to the United the Seven Kingdoms book. This is just telling you, oh, the Dance of the Dragon's War happened, and then Alicent did this, and Rhaenyra did that, and Aegon II did this, and essentially just retelling you the things that happen in history. And the things that are happening are for sure interesting, but it is not a character-centered story as the main series is. So for that, I personally think this is George R. R. Martin's lesser works within the A Song of Ice and Fire series, but I still very much enjoy it. The other thing I will say is, although I do find the first 630 pages of this book to be very, very interesting, from Aenys and Maegor through Visenya, all the stuff with the Dance of the Dragon's War, even the Hour of the Wolf I find very interesting. However, after the Hour of the Wolf, once we get to a particular regency within the last 130 pages of this book definitely starts hitting a wall. We start hitting a point where it's like, okay, yes, like, I got it, George. Just like in real life history, Targaryen history sort of repeats real life history, where, you think that the story is over and you get a happy ending, but a new kind of nuisance, a new kind of threat is threatening to overtake the current king from beneath the shadows. And it's just, it's very repetitive. It gets to a point where it's like, all right, yes, I got it. I'm just ready for this story to end. And George R. R. Martin goes on and on and on for 130 more pages, and I just was ready for the book to end. I think it should have ended after the Hour of the Wolf, but what can you say? At least we have a very good first 630 pages of this book. And if you haven't checked out Fire and Blood by George R. R. Martin, I definitely recommend you do so. Or if you don't want to check it out, definitely check out my summary for the second half of Fire and Blood coming up real soon, and the first half of Fire and Blood, which I actually already have up on this channel. So Fire and Blood is my number 7 book of 2025. Number 6. Rhythm of War by Brandon Sanderson, the 4th book in Brandon Sanderson's Stormlight Archive series. Now, I know I'm probably going to get a lot of pushback in the comments from people with either saying, what the heck, Advocate, you're ranking Rhythm of War that low on your top 10 reads of 2025? Or, what the heck, Advocate, Rhythm of War was a waste of time. What are you doing putting this cinder block on your top 10 list? It should be number 11 billion or something. Well, this is my own personal top 10 list, and I can put whatever books I want on it. So, Rhythm of War, I thought, was a very enjoyable read for the most part. I thought, compared actually to some of the other Stormlight Archive books, I thought Rhythm of War was one of the stronger books in the series. It's definitely no Way of Kings. I think I've just given up on the fact that there's not going to be any other Brandon Sanderson book that's going to be able to top my love for The Way of Kings. But as far as compared to Words of Radiance, the second book in the series, and Oathbringer, the third book in the series, I thought Rhythm of War actually outperformed books 2 and 3 within the Stormlight Archive to make Rhythm of War slightly more enjoyable than those other 2 books. However, my issues with Brandon Sanderson's prose, with his telling not showing, with his verbose way of just really just stretching out some of these scenes to make sure you know how epic they are, and to really just take in the grasp of how many words Brandon Sanderson has written, is getting very, very annoying with each passing book. This is the longest book in the series prior to Wind and Truth, the 5th book in the series, which was released in December 2024. And although I do think that most of the length is merited, not all of it is. Brandon Sanderson has very, with each passing book, it seems he's gotten more and more inefficient with his ability to summarize things within like something that he could say within one sentence, he says in 3 sentences. And although that doesn't sound like much, it adds up very, very quickly to the point that you get a 1,300-page cinder block here. There are passages within this book that I'm like, wow, Brandon, was this absolutely really necessary? You could have really just kind of trimmed this down to be 200 pages less than what it is, and it would have made for a more interesting and more memorable book than what we got. But despite that, what we got, I think, was pretty interesting. The scientific discussions between Navani Kolin and Raboniel on Eurythero about how the physical sciences that govern this world work with the different lights of this world, I thought that was all extremely interesting. And then in addition to that, Kaladin, he finally kind of rises a little bit to the forefront to become more of an important player than what he was in books 2 and 3. I thought he had the best story arc in The Way of Kings, and I think he once again has the best story arc in Rhythm of War. And thankfully, his story arc encapsulates a good, 50% chunk of this book, and it is absolutely fantastic. I absolutely love the more introspective journey we go on with Kaladin here. There's a little bit of PTSD with the events that happened in the prior books that have kind of caught up to Kaladin, and seeing Kaladin trying to overcome that PTSD and trying to navigate all the grief and depression that he feels, I thought was super uber, just very, very realistic and very engrossing and immersing. I'm like, wow, this is a very powerful story here with Kaladin, and I'm so glad it is included in this story. I can very much see people who struggle with PTSD and grief and those kinds of things reading this book and maybe not being inspired, but at least being able to feel a little bit better about themselves and the things that they're going through, hopefully. But those positive attributes are what make Rhythm of War one of the better books within the Stormlight Archive series, was one of the better books within Brandon Sanderson's repertoire, and I think it's a very great book. I just, due to its length and its verbose prose and Brandon Sanderson's annoying tendency to inefficiently tell, not show, it is a book that I don't have any desire to go back and reread, and it's what makes me hesitant to read the 5th book in the series, Wind and Truth, as I hear that book. The tendencies that I did not like about Rhythm of War are magnified threefold in Wind and Truth, so I don't exactly have any hurry to particularly read Wind and Truth, but maybe someday I will. Number 5. Carl's Doomsday Scenario by Matt Dinniman. This is the 2nd book in Matt Dinniman's Dungeon Crawler Carl series, and I thought, similar to the first, which might show up later up on this list, I thought Carl's Doomsday Scenario was a very, very fun read. The Dungeon Crawler Carl series is my first ever foray into the lit RPG genre, literary role-playing game, essentially a video game in book format, and I thought, as of these first 2 books that I've read, I thought that they were a ton of fun. The only reason why I think the first book is higher on this list, spoilers, than the 2nd book is because the first book was my first ever foray and my first ever experience with the lit RPG genre, and it kind of just blew me away with how fun a story like this can be. So because it was such a genuine surprise, I think it stuck with me more than this book, where we're kind of know what to expect. Some of the surprise factor is gone, and it just doesn't quite stick with you as much. But despite that, I would still say that Carl's Doomsday Scenario is a very worthy follow-up to the first Dungeon Crawler Carl book by Matt Dinniman. It's a lot of fun if you love video games, if you love meta humor, if you love pop culture references, if you love Abed Nadir from the TV show Community, a fantastic TV show, then you'll love this book. The only thing I will say that kind of detracts, in addition to just some of the less surprise factor when it comes to comparing this book to the first book in the series, the only other thing I will say that makes this book kind of weaker than the first book is that although this book is still funny, it is slightly less funny. There's less humor in here. Matt Dinniman spends more time kind of building out the world that this story takes place in, or the universe that this story takes place in, I should say, with some of the politics that govern the game, the Dungeon Crawler game that is the center of this book series. And although that's fine and all, some of the more serious elements that Matt Dinniman tries to tackle with this book series are told, and I know I keep kind of banging my head into a wall by continuously saying this, but it is told through a very telling, not showing way. Now, there's nothing wrong with telling, not showing. However, when an author has to clearly communicate the themes of the book to me, the reader, verbatim, that's when I kind of start zoning out and being like, really, Matt? Do you not have any confidence in me as a reader to be able to understand the themes of this story? I mean, this is already a book intended for adults, so I think we're not children. We know we can read between the lines. Do you really not expect us to understand the themes and then you have to spell them out for us in order for us to understand what you're trying to say with the story. I feel a little bit insulted, and I don't like it whatsoever when he does that, when any author does that. But that aside, I mean, those telling not showing incidents where he's communicating the themes are few and far between, that they don't detract the overall experience for me as a reader. So it's still a very fun iteration on the first book in the series, and it makes me still excited, even though I'm not as excited after the second book after I was with the first book. I'm still excited to delve further into the Dungeon Crawler Carl series and read Matt Deneman's third book, The Dungeon Anarchist Cookbook. Number 4. Windhaven by George R. R. Martin and Lisa Tuttle is a novella compilation released in 1981 between these two former lovebirds that then happened to break up during the writing process for this book, and then they stayed friends but were able to keep writing despite their awkward new relationship status. So, that's gotta be weird. But anyway, this Windhaven book, similar to the United of the Seven Kingdoms novella compilation, is a novella compilation that consists of 3 different novellas that were then kind of stapled together and binded within this Windhaven book. And I thought Windhaven was a very interesting story. It was a very interesting read. Similar to Knight of the Seven Kingdoms, it has this very kind of endearing, uplifting, kind of heartwarming vibe going on for it. And I thought it was a very just kind of fun read to delve into. But despite how fun it is, it's surprisingly deep. There's a lot of deep themes within these novellas that permeate the entire story. And I thought it was a very kind of interesting look into classism, racism, and war, and just all the things that we've kind of come to expect from George R. R. Martin's deep theming. Now, personally, I'm not familiar with Lisa Tuttle's bibliography, but I do think it speaks loudly to George R. R. Martin and the philosophies he represents, the philosophies he believes in, because those philosophies are very much ingrained within this story of Windhaven. It's a very great read, and another thing that I really like was how each novella builds on the revelations and new discoveries from the previous novella. Events from novella 1 lead into novella 2, and then events from novella 2 lead into novella 3 as each novella iterates on the events from the previous novellas, and it's just such a great... It makes it feel like one cohesive read despite the 3 different stories that take place throughout the 3 different time periods of Maris, the main character of the story's life. So it's a very fun read. If you have not read Windhaven by George R. R. Martin and Lisa Tuttle, I definitely recommend you do so, especially if you're a fan of the United of the Seven Kingdoms novella compilation. I thought it was a lot of fun. I thought it was great, and I'm very much looking forward to seeing what else is within George R. R. Martin's non-A Song of Ice and Fire catalog. Number 3. Dungeon Crawler Carl by Matt Deneman. Yes, the second book was on this top 10 list, so it wouldn't be fair if the first book wasn't on this list either. Like I mentioned in my placing of Carl's Doomsday Scenario on this list, Dungeon Crawler Carl is my first ever foray into the lit RPG genre, and most especially this first book within the Dungeon Crawler Carl series was most definitely my first ever foray into this genre, and I gotta say, this book was a lot of fun. It caught me by surprise. I did not expect to love this book as much as I did. Again, like I mentioned previously, if you're a fan of video games, Abed Nadir from Community, meta pop culture references, I think you'll very much come away really loving this book. I thought it was a ton of fun. It's not quite as deep as maybe you might expect. The humor is quite juvenile at various places, but I think maybe I just have a juvenile sense of humor because I laughed like a giddy little person during my read through of this book and some of the more comedic elements of the story. So I thought it was a very fun read. I'm very curious to see what happens later on in the series. I do have plans to potentially read books 3 and beyond within the 2026 calendar year, but we'll see if that shapes out. But as far as this book goes, I very much loved it. I've already kind of said my piece on this within the Carl's Doomsday Scenario placement. And if you haven't read the Dungeon Crawler Carl series but are keen on checking it out, definitely check it out because it's a ton of fun. Number 2. Shogun by James Clavell. Yes, the book that served as the source material for the 1980 television show adaptation of the Shogun TV show series, and also served as the source material for the 2024 Disney Plus series, Shogun is here. And maybe it's my own bias, maybe it's my own love for Japanese culture and Japanese anime and Japanese anything that made me fall in love with Shogun, but there was something about Shogun that immediately grabbed me when I first read this book, and just seeing the main character, John Blackthorne, delve into Japanese culture when at first he's like confused by it and doesn't really like it, and then over the course of the book begin to really fall in love with the culture, fall in love with the country, fall in love with the girl, It was a very fun, immersive journey to go with our character as he transforms over the course of the book. I thought the politics of feudal Japan were very, very interesting. Yes, there are some things within this book that aren't entirely historically accurate when it comes to actual feudal Japan that, believe it or not, the Shogun 2024 TV show series actually fixes within their adaptation of this source material. But even despite that, I thought the talks of the different daimyos, the way the feudal system works, although the characters are a little bit too seppuku happy in this book, I thought it was still a very interesting journey to delve into this book. There are some things that you could tell that James Clavell really, really did his research on, most particularly with regards to the Jesuit Catholic missions that take place in Western Kyushu and in Nagasaki, Japan during this time period of 17th century Japan. And I thought it was just a very interesting historical fiction to delve into, and generally just a very interesting journey to delve into with John Blackthorne, Mariko, and of course, everyone's favorite asshole, Toranaga. Oh, Toranaga. So if you haven't read Shogun, definitely check it out. Just make sure you block out maybe like 3 weeks to 4 weeks worth of time during your read through, because this book will definitely take you a while. Number 1. Fever Dream by George R. R. Martin. The best not a Song of Ice and Fire George R. R. Martin book I've read up to this point, and the best book that I read in 2025. Oh my gosh, guys. If you're still waiting on the Winds of Winter, if you've read everything else within George R. R. Martin's A Song of Ice and Fire repertoire, I definitely urge you guys to go out of your way and check out George R. R. Martin's Not a Song of Ice and Fire books, most especially Fever Dream, because this book was quite a ride. It was immersive, it was interesting, it was descriptive, it was melancholic, and it was deep, and it made me feel things, and I absolutely loved my time with this book. It is just such a very great read. A lot of George R. R. Martin's writing quirks that we've kind of come to know and love within the A Song of Ice and Fire series are definitely front and center here within this Fever Dream book, and they come alive here, and it's so good and so interesting. I think without delving into spoilers, if you want to watch spoilers, then definitely check out a couple of the videos that I have on this Booktube Advocate YouTube channel. The thing that I love the most about this book was how melancholic it feels. Again, I don't want to delve too much into spoilers, but there's a particular scene here close to the end of the book that made me just like very cognizant of the life that I have lived and what I've done with these past several years of my life and what I will do with the next several years of my life, and how within the blink of an eye, things can disappear within an instant, and we really got to enjoy and make the most of what we have. And it's so good. It's so deep. It tackles some serious themes here. Obviously, it takes place during the 1850s of New Orleans and St. Louis, so we've got some US Civil War stuff, some racism stuff, so those themes are very much front and present here, but it's really the characters of the story that make this book really jump out and come alive. The characters of Joshua York, Abner Marsh, the Roose Bolton vampire and Damon Julian, and of course Sour Billy Tipton. Even he, despite being a slimy guy, actually has quite a few qualities about him that make him very interesting. They're all very interesting characters, and I very much enjoyed my read-through of Fever Dream. So if you have not read Fever Dream and you are a fan of George R. R. Martin, or if you just want a new book to read and are looking for something to add to your bookshelf but haven't necessarily read a George R. R. Martin book, I definitely recommend Fever Dream. It was a fantastic book, and it is my pick for the best book I read in 2025. So there you have it, ladies and gentlemen. Those are the top 10 books I read in 2025. What did you think of my list? Did you agree or disagree with any of my picks for the top 10 best books I read in 2025? What are the top 10 best books you read in 2025? Well, definitely let me know by chiming down in the comments section down below. And again, while you're down there, hit that like, comment, and subscribe to my channel if you care to do so. That would really mean the world to me, though. Thank you so much. I've got big plans for the 2026 calendar year. Lots of books to read, lots of books to review, lots of books to potentially kind of rake through the coals. We'll see. But I am very much looking forward to the 2026 year and everything that is to come with all the good reads there. So I hope you are as well, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you all so very much for all the support you've shown me this 2025 calendar year. It truly does mean the world to me, and I hope I'm able to be there for you guys, kind of in this parasocial YouTube to viewer way, in 2026 with all the books we'll read then. So until next time, guys, thank you once again, and The Advocate, out.